I strongly objected to the idea of moving to a new house in a place I had never heard of in my life. What would make me leave my friends and my life in the city to live in a small village? But despite all the attempts I made to prevent the moving from happening, the obstacles were stronger than me and I had to move. After the first week of moving, I accepted my fate and began to adapt to the environment which I found myself compelled to live in. The new house was in a village, which I like to call it, the Brown Eye. It was relatively far from the city, and the nearest bus going there needed 10 minutes of walking just to catch. The Brown Eye was almost isolated, but it was incredibly beautiful. Everything was beautiful. Ancient trees, roads covered with flowers, and the old houses. Even the air smells different. And the night there makes you feel like you are sitting on the moon between the stars. The place was great. I didn't need anything but finding a friend to spend my time with him, hanging around. It didn't take me long to find a group of 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. Dee, Tom, Susan, and Jane. Dee was long and skinny boy. His hair was black, tall and curly. He was very intelligent, but he was a little bit coward. Tom was the rich boy of the group. His length was almost as long as mine, but he was too fat. His hair was yellow and short, and he had a weak personality. Susan was the most beautiful girl you may see. She was a girl who cared for herself very well. Her hair was long and black as dark. Her skin was white like snow and soft as cotton. And finally Jane. At first, she looked like a normal girl, so I didn't care much about her. When I met them, Dee was the leader of the group, which didn't last long. After becoming a member of the group, I became the leader. I had the intelligence that competed Dee's intelligence, but I also had the boldness that he didn't have. Tom had a weak personality and was followed by anyone who led. Susan was following me wherever I went, whatever I said, and Jean didn't object to me as a leader. Don't get me wrong. Leadership back then wasn't like a leadership of an army. It's not complicated. The leader was the one who decides where we would go or what we will do. He was planning how we would spend our day after taking everyone's opinion. And of course, Dee was challenging me. Can you do this? Can you do that? I was taking his competition as a game. I enjoyed it a lot. I beat him sometimes and let him beat me some other times. I didn't want him to look bad in front of the group, especially female members. But unfortunately, Dee wasn't taking the competition as a game. On a Friday night, while we were messing around, we found an old house, a very old house. The house had a large wooden porch with some pillows on a rocking chair. Dee said, "It's Mrs. Grace's house," followed by Tom saying, "She is the worst old woman you can ever hear about. Her husband and her sons abandoned her because of her violence." And while we were inspecting the place around the house, Dee took a lighter from his pocket, looked at me with his challenging eyes, saying, "I don't think you will take the challenge this time." Regardless of his words, Dee had a voice tone, an eye look, and a body language that make you unable to refuse his challenge. These were some of his own abilities, which he succeeded in using against me that night. Anyway, I told him to complete his words and introduce the new challenge. "I don't think you have the courage to go and set the fire on this chair," he continued. But before I respond, like lightning speed, Jane yelled, "No, don't do this." I didn't care about her, so she tried to stop me saying, "What if Mrs. Grace called you? What if she called the police?" Dee replied, "She is an old lady and she must be sleeping now. She won't wake up before sunrise. And again, I neglected Jane and what she thought. I looked at Susan and asked her, "What do you see?" "I would love to enjoy watching the chair burning in the fire," she answered. Then Tom encouraged me. "Come on, show us what you can do." We all hid between the trees, not too far from the house, to get a clear vision. I was getting ready to take the challenge, and Jane was begging me, with her wet brown eyes, not to go. While I was talking to myself, how did I not notice her beautiful brown eyes before now? Anyway, I started walking towards the house, with confidence, in moderate but fast steps. I stood in front of the chair, took the lighter out of my pocket, and looked at the flame for 2 seconds. Then I set the fire to the pillows on the chair. I quickly ran to the trees to enjoy the sight of the burned chair with my friends. When I arrived, I saw frightened eyes looking at the house. I looked behind me to see the porch burning, then the door of the house, then the ceiling. While I was watching in panic, Dee cried out.
Run!
The first one who ran was Susan. Then Dee grabbed Jane's hand and ran, followed by Tom. They left me. They left me alone, unable to move any muscle in my body but my heart, which was beating fast from the shock. As I was watching the fire eating the pillars of the house, I heard a voice, screaming voice. There is someone in the house. Someone is burning, alive. She must be Mrs. Grace, woke up between the flames. What should I do? I must save her. I'm going to break into the house, either to save her life, or die with her. But suddenly, the fire truck came out of nowhere, and 2 firefighters break into the house, while the others were doing their best to put out the fire. At this point, I ran away for 30 minutes. I didn't stop for a moment to catch my breath until I reached my house. As soon as I arrived at my house, I jumped into my room, closed the door, then sat in the corner of the room, trembling. At this moment, I wasn't trembling from the cold. I was terrified. Every single cell in my body was shaking from fear. Because of something I did with my bloody hands. I couldn't sleep that night, nor the next, nor the next. The sound of screaming was repeating in my ears. What did I do? How did I not think about the consequences? Where was my mind? The poor Mrs. Grace was a victim of a silly game between me and Dee. 3 days after the incident, I was waiting for the news, and a friend came to visit me. A friend I didn't expect. It was Dee. I was waiting for someone else, but anyway, I was anxious to find out what had happened. I took him to my room. I closed the door, then I asked him, "Is Mrs. Grace alive?" "Unfortunately, no," he answered. "She died in hospital the next morning of burning of the house." His words were as if he pulled the table that was under my feet, leaving me hanging, with a thick rope tied in my neck. I couldn't breathe then, and every part of my body was trembling. I burned her alive. I killed Mrs. Grace. While I was dying slowly, I heard a chuckle, followed by an explosive laugh. "Do you lie?" I asked him. "No, I didn't lie. Mrs. Grace really died," he replied while laughing. "She was taken to hospital from the supermarket 10 hours before you burned her house. She had a heart attack while she was fighting the cashier. She was too old to fight. She killed herself." I asked him about the screams I heard. "It must be her old dog. They found her burned when they entered the house," he answered. She was locked up in the house, waiting for her mistress to come back to feed her. She was an old dog, and she would have died starving anyway. I asked him about the group, and at that moment, his face became serious again. Then he said, "Policemen did their investigations, but they didn't find any evidence against you. Yet. Jane, Susan, Tom, and me are the only witnesses. Don't worry, we will bury your little secret with us." I told the group that what happened at this night should be a secret. But I warn you, you have to break your friendship with them, and don't speak to any of them. They hate you now, because you burned the dog alive. And you don't want them to tell the police, or one of their parents about what you did. And be sure that no one will know that you are the one who burned the house, as long as you do what I tell you. After these words, Dee left my house, smiling his big smile, making everything crystal clear. I fell into his trap, and this was just his first step of making me live alone, suffering at the bottom of misery, with no friend but remorse. The story is not over yet. As children grow up, the forced fear will grow, and it would be great if you were one of the first 1,000 subscribers. If there is something you wanted to ask about, or something that bothers you, don't hesitate to write a comment.